Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. On this, the day after Thanksgiving, news takes no holiday as we ponder the status of the Hard Rock demolition, a cyber attack on state government, a smelly landfill, and an unsolved high-profile murder. In politics, we'll examine a change in St. Tammany Parish and the complexities of the state's presidential primary system. At our table are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. Sarah Pagones, reporter, The Times-Picayune, New Orleans Advocate. And David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. And we're going to go over to Dave Cohen first, and just the latest on Hard Rock. What is now happening over there?
Well, right now, nothing. We know that we've kind of gotten to a point where they believe secured everything that can be secured on the building. They've strapped the crane that was dangling to the building so they don't feel that's any more of a collapse threat. They've got pedestrian covered walkways around the building on the immediate perimeter now, and they feel like it's as safe as it can be. That's why we've seen the evacuation zones shrink so dramatically and even had the announcement that businesses directly adjacent to across the street and nearby are reopening, including the Sanger. So that's the good news, is that things seem stable. What's completely unstable is the future of that site now. The mayor very vehemently came out just a couple of weeks ago and said they're going to implode it, they're going to demolish it, they're going to bring it down, insisting that because of the threat that it posed to public safety, she had the authority to make those decisions and calls. But even as she was making that announcement, we were hearing that there was behind-the-scenes discussions from folks who control the money, from folks who have an interest in the project on many levels, that there was pressure being applied to the mayor's office to say, hold on, slow your roll, let's wait here and see what our options are. Can we find a way to preserve what is able to be saved of this building? And we're talking tens of millions of dollars in demolition and reconstruction costs. When you get down to it, if they could save at least those bottom 9 floors. The question was, is there a way to save those 9 floors and remove everything above it?
The interesting thing is that when they demolished the cranes in that separate operation, it was done through an emergency contract by the state that the owners, Mohan Kalis, had to pay for under the terms of that contract. But this time, it's not being handled by a contract with the city. It's actually demolition contracts that would have been through the developers contracting, and now the city appears to have a lot less control than we thought they would in comparison to what the state had.
Right, and I think while those discussions were happening behind the scenes, while that pressure was being applied to the mayor's office, the lawyers were hard at work as well, trying to establish what the case history is and what the precedent may be can the city, under its legal authority, demolish this building without due process for the developer and for the owner.
Owners still own it. The city hasn't taken possession or ownership of it.
But they keep citing that there's actually laws that allow them to call the shots, but they're not calling the shots as much as they made it out to appear at the beginning.
And something that's working against them is the fact that they keep shrinking the evacuation zone, signaling that the building is not in imminent danger to public safety, that it's not going to fall and kill people if they get too close to it. That was the authority under which they were operating, was that if this thing doesn't come down, if we don't take it down, it's going to come down on its own, and it's going to destroy other buildings, it's going to endanger lives, it's going to endanger property. The fact that they've kept shrinking that evacuation zone works against the city now in terms of its argument that they have to control what happens from henceforth. So I think we're in for a long legal battle, much longer than anyone thought. And the 9-week time frame that was set once the city accepted a bid for the demolition and announced that it would be done right after the college football national championship in mid-January, I would be extremely surprised if we see anything happen by that time.
But what's new is the possibility that those bottom floors may be saved?
I think that's really the heart of the debate now. Is the question is, can they be saved? Initially, there was a prevailing thought that don't save anything because, oh, there's 3 people died in this building. Don't save anything because the entire construction project is now suspect. But I was talking to a real estate expert and a marketing expert, and what they both told me was the public has a very short memory. That 6 months, a year, 3 years from now, when this may be up and operating again, or finally, no one's going to be, when they're online booking a stay in New Orleans, saying, oh, wait, I don't want to stay there. That was that building that partially collapsed and 3 people died in. They feel like it can still be a successful business venture on that site with what is ever salvageable. But there's still that discussion to be had about safety, about legality, and a number of other issues.
But 3 people, as you said, died. 1 was removed. There are 2 still souls whose remains are in that building. Will they ever be removed?
Well, if they implode it, as the mayor wants to, the experts we talked to, and we talked to several forensic experts, they said there won't be anything salvageable left if they implode the building. You may find a bone fragment or a piece of a skull. I don't want to get too graphic, but there's not much left right now. Yeah. I mean, this was October 12th that these individuals died in that building. Nature has taken its course now, and all that's really left, they tell us, are skeletal remains and maybe some connective tissue. So by the time if they take the building down, and particularly if they do it through an explosion, no, there really wouldn't be a whole lot salvageable. You'd get the families would probably get a box that would contain various materials, maybe part of their loved one.
Heartbreaking.
The owner also has a great deal of interest in retaining those bottom 8 floors, which there's no evidence that there's anything structurally unsound about them. All of the structural issues which we've been investigating along with our partners at the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate have to do with the top 9 floors, which were structural steel. And, we found, John Zimmerman and I, that some of the plans for specific types of metal decking that they poured the concrete onto do not match what was actually installed there.
Really?
So the blueprints and what was submitted for the permits is not what actually happened on the site.
Correct. And, what impact that had exactly is still to be determined, but we have engineering experts looking at that and looking at some of the ways that they've deviated in various ways from what they told the city.
Well, that raises so many other questions, though. If there are documented deviations from the plans, where was the oversight from the city? Was it negligence on the city's part? Was there a lack of oversight? Or was there an intentional looking another way? That gets us all back to the FBI
and
investigation.
As we've already reported, there were limited ways that city inspectors were looking at this. They were not looking, for instance, at what happened after they poured the concrete, just that it was ready to pour the concrete, and those types of things are at the heart of the investigation.
Meanwhile, investigations still continue.
Right.
And we did see people actually in the structure. For a while, no one was allowed to walk through that structure. But when that crane was stabilized, we did see people in there, workmen in there.
Right. And they've collected forensic, analyses of the structure and 3D modeling and all that stuff.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Dave Hammer, we're going to stick with you right now. Over in Jefferson Parish, folks for I don't know, the better part of 2 years or so,
right,
really
exactly.
been complaining of just a foul odor, on the West Bank and then over across the river, and River Ridge and Harahan, and even a little bit beyond. You could smell that.
Right.
And maybe we found out what was the cause of it?
Right. Well, it's not just foul odors. They're also complaining about human health impacts, right. And, there's confusion because there are other sources of potential dangerous or toxic gases, but the DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, did cite specifically the Jefferson Parish landfill for high levels of hydrogen sulfide, which can be dangerous and cause breathing issues and skin irritation and ENT irritation, and at high levels can be deadly. And they found very high levels inside the landfill gas collection system and found that it wasn't working. The thing that was really surprising is that we got an exclusive interview with Rick Buller, who was the landfill engineer that oversaw the landfill for 23 years, who hadn't commented publicly since this all kind of started blowing up in 2018. And he said that something rare. He said, it was my fault. I approved a type of industrial waste, hydrated lime, that when it mixed with certain things in the landfill and because of sulfates released more hydrogen sulfide, and I didn't realize until it was too late. And by the time I realized it, nobody wanted to listen to me anymore at the Jefferson Parish government, and I was basically shown the door.
Mm-hmm. And so part of the problem here is you really have a terrific, I couldn't begin to explain it really right now, but you guys did a terrific animation and graphic if you want to take a look at what happens to these materials, but gases that were supposed to be taken away were not, and they were seeping upwards.
Right, and many thanks to the folks at our tank called the Tegna tank in Denver that put that together. But yeah, I was able to show with this animated graphic how the system is supposed to work and why it failed. Basically, in a nutshell, the rain and other liquids that seep down through the landfill after it's covered up are collected and pumped out, and so is gas that develops in there. And when it's not collected properly, because it's flooded, in this case it was flooded, that gas escapes and goes into the air, and that's part of the reason why people are suffering.
I think part of the scariness of this, though, is now that it's been established, okay, here's the problem, here's what's causing it, to fix it, they have to make it worse before they make it better.
Right, and they've hired for another $5 million. One of the stories that I did looked at all of the $6 million plus that they've already spent and some of the concerns about the money and where it's gone. But now we have another $5 million being spent over the next year to try to shore up that gas collection system, and it's the competing landfill next door, River Birch, private landfill, that will be doing that, and they can bring it into their gas production plant and sell it, and Jefferson Parish will share in some of those revenues from selling that gas.
But when they drill the wells to collect the gas,
right,
more of it gets released.
More of it being released, so they say it's going to be worse before it gets better. So over the next couple months, it's going to be and we've already heard complaints from this current round of construction from people in Harahan and River Ridge saying it's getting bad again. So
they've started this work already.
Yes, and it will take about a year, and they say that they hope, because of their expertise in this field at River Birch, that it will be finally taken care of when they're done.
There was the annual lunch this past week of JEDCO, Jefferson Parish Economic Development Group, and a lot of elected officials, and they were talking one after the other about all the wonderful things going on in Jefferson with housing and schools and development. But the one thing everybody can see, that the one sore point is the landfill.
Yeah,
that's the major problem in Jefferson.
New Parish President-elect Cynthia Lee Shang says that she does make this a top priority coming in January, and she wants to look at really strengthening regulation. She wants to encourage development, more industry in that area, but it needs to be done with careful regulation, she said.
Well, everyone said that with the widening of the Huey P. Long Bridge, this was the new promised land, was all this area there in Wagamin, in Bridge City, that this was going to blow up and develop. But just about the time they finished the bridge was about the time they realized, wait a minute, something really stinks over here. And hence here we are. Hopefully, if they can get this under control and demonstrate that they have their finger on this, that we will see all that development, because there's a lot of land there, and that's the only land left in Jefferson Parish.
And that this will be the fix, but we're going to have to sort of grin and bear it over the next, if you're a Jefferson Parish resident in that area, over the next year or so. All right, David, thanks a lot. Sarah, over to you, and a really, really sad and perplexing story of what was the murder of a St. Tammany Parish resident, Nanette Krentel, and her family really hasn't been happy with the investigation.
No, they haven't been, and by her family, we're talking about her father and her siblings, half-siblings. She has brothers and sisters from both her dad and her mom. They've been perplexed by it from the beginning. They don't understand, for example, why when they showed up at the scene of the fire a couple days afterwards, that they were seeing things there like guns that hadn't been removed, and other things that we've come to learn were left behind.
And also her husband was a fire chief.
There was a horrible irony in that, a fire, at first everybody thought she died in the fire, and she was the wife of a fire chief. But it was a week later at a memorial service that it hit, that the sheriff's office released a news release saying, no, in fact, she had been killed by a gunshot to the head.
But the family was not made aware of it.
They were not
heard it
aware
through the
of it.
media.
They did. Actually, they kind of heard it a little bit before that through a website that's been critical of the fire marshal, saying yes, she died of a bullet in the brain, which turned out to be true, and it was kind of a shocking and horrible time for that to come out.
Now, the family says that she was in fear of her life.
She was. She sent emails. She was in constant contact with her family through emails and texts, saying that she was afraid, that she was very afraid of her husband's brother. She was afraid of other people that she felt were threatening to her. And, sadly, her concerns and fears seemed to have been borne out by what happened to her, about the fact that she was shot and her animals died with her in the fire. And here we are 2.5 years later, and there is no suspect, and there's no solution in sight.
And you mentioned, guns were not found because the scene was released back to her immediate family, her husband, who was the owner of the property as well. Then the authorities went back and
they went back a couple days later.
Again. Yeah.
They went back and they gridded it off, and they sifted through every bit of rubble, and you can see dramatically in aerial shots how much was left initially, and then the slab completely cleared off after the second time. But some time had gone by then, and so you have to wonder about even things like chain of custody, if there were some evidence that was recovered. The fire was very hot. It destroyed a lot of what maybe could have shed some light on what happened to her.
Well, it seems that's why the fire was set.
No doubt.
To cover the evidence.
Right.
Who is investigating this at this point? Here we are more than a year later, and does it look like there's any progress being made towards determining who murdered this poor woman?
Well, they say, the sheriff's office in St. Tammany says that they still have a detective that's dedicated to it, that spends full time on it, that they are working with other federal partners. We know that there have been interviews conducted, even recently. They do pursue leads, they say, but they've also fired one of the members of their team in a strange twist the case took, where they kind of went on a hunt for people that they thought might be leaking information to the family. So they did a criminal investigation on criminal defamation, which is a charge that's on the books in the state of Louisiana but has been deemed unconstitutional. They went after a HUD agent, and they fired a member of their team for talking to him about the case.
And the story you and Katie Moore did was really interesting because it showed how her husband had been concerned about her safety and set up these cameras, and then they weren't working.
They weren't working. Well, the two at the gate had gone off, which I guess happens a lot out in the rural part of the parish. And that night he was tired and didn't fix it. There had been a kind of contentious parish council meeting. He just came home. There were also cameras all around the perimeter of the house. They were working, but they fed into a DVR that was doused with accelerant and set on fire.
So is the investigation continuing?
They claim they are continuing to investigate.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Errol, over to you. We're going to shift over to politics a little bit now. Okay, we've finished our governor's race. We too are going to participate in presidential primaries.
Now we're shifting into the presidential mode, from the gubernatorial mode to the presidential mode. When the founders created the Constitution, they created the presidency, they created this electoral college system. They did all that, but they didn't quite figure out beyond that or below that the parties and how the parties select the people who go and select the delegates who nominate people to run for president. And we still haven't quite figured that out every year. Every 4 years we go through this, and you see all these states with these different strategies and these different formulas, and Louisiana has tried different things. And in April 4th we're going to have the Louisiana primary. 3 states in the country, Alaska and Hawaii being the other ones that are going to have primaries that day. Now it's going to be a Republican primary too, but nobody's really looking at that because everybody knows the outcome of that. And so the real question will be the Democratic primary, and you only vote by party in these. And according to party, these are governed by party rules, and so Louisiana will be able to elect 61 people to go to the national convention to vote for a candidate, the Democratic nominee. Now, the formula for selecting that 61 people is more complicated than Dave's landfill, all right? That some are apportioned by congressional district, some are elected officials, there's other ways, but it comes out all kind of formulas which come out to 61 people who'll be elected. The votes on April 4th, they're going to figure out like this congressional district gets 8 people. Then on another day, there'll be a day in May where they'll actually elect those 8 people. So it's very, very complicated. Meanwhile, there's this thing called Super Tuesday, which is growing in importance every 4 years. And that's March 3rd. And Super Tuesday gets a lot of attention because it's a lot of states that all at once. And so if somebody does well in Super Tuesday, and there's a lot of southern states in it. In fact, some reporters call it the Southeastern Conference primary because it's a lot of the states that are in the Southeastern Conference other than Louisiana, which of course is LSU. But anyway, and so Super Tuesday will probably have a big impact on how Louisiana goes a month later because it's going to probably whittle down the field a good bit. And so by the time there may be maybe 3 or 4 major candidates, and then Louisiana will be one to select. Now, whoever they nominate will go to the National Convention, and out of that will come a candidate, the Democratic nominee, and the people from Louisiana will go home and campaign for him, even though they probably has no chance of carrying Louisiana, but the process continues.
Okay, we will try to participate in it. Righty, thanks a lot. Sarah, I'm going to go back over to you. St. Tammany politics, from presidential to over to parish-wide. Now, St. Tammany has selected a new president.
That's right. It's kind of unprecedented because the Home Rule Charter form's only been around for about 20 years, and it's the first time the parish president has gotten ousted by a challenger. So Pat Brister could have had a 3rd term. That's how many you're allowed to have, and she was defeated really soundly by former Covington Mayor Mike Cooper.
Why? I mean, were people that dissatisfied with the job she did, or Cooper just had so much support because he was the Covington mayor?
I don't think the Covington mayorship really got him the support. I think what happened was there was a lot of disenchantment with Pat Brister. 3 times they tried to pass a renewal of a pair of sales taxes for the jail and the Justice Center. They were defeated 3 times. Some people think, well, people were mad at her about the taxes. Other people said, well, maybe they voted the taxes down because they were, kind of giving a referendum on her. She made some things. She did some unpopular things. For example, she created some economic development districts that levied taxes that people didn't even get to vote on. A year later, after a lot of complaints from the business community, she repealed them. But by then, I think the damage had been done.
Any sort of new direction for Cooper?
I'm not really sure what Mike's going to do. He has not been very forthcoming on details of what he plans to do.
One thing on his platform is no taxes. So.
Yeah, he said, I didn't raise taxes in Covington. But, of course, the other thing is, I will say, at budget hearings last week, they said, well, in 2022, we are going to exhaust our fund balances, which is basically how we're supporting the jail and the Justice Center right now.
Yeah, okay. Dave, did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say, I think anecdotally, what we kept hearing was it was all about taxes, that the conservative base in St. Tammany really felt like they wanted someone in there who would not raise taxes. And they said they just got what we heard, and again, this is anecdotal, but the people who would call in and participate in the conversations would say they were tired of her trying to raise taxes or raising taxes and then repealing them. They just felt like she was not really dedicated to their core values of spend less, tax less.
And there was a piece that went out from Mike Cooper that said, a core tenet of the Republican Party is to have less government, less taxes. And then the next line was, have you met Pat Brister? So.
Okay.
But any elected official knows that proposing taxes is not going to be popular. So could it be that they really did need to raise taxes?
Well, I mean, these were renewals. These were not new taxes. The first time they tried it, it got defeated, and they came back and they pared them down a little bit, and they said, okay, we're listening to you. But by then, it came a little closer that time, but it still failed. And then the 3rd time, it was like, I can't believe you're asking us again. We told you no twice.
Okay, new parish leadership in January? Is that
yes, January is when they take office.
All right, thanks a lot, Sarah. Dave Cohen, back over to you for a wrap-up. Cyber attack on state government, ransomware.
Yeah. Wow. And the state has been, under the Edwards administration, very proactive about cybersecurity, has been very participatory when we've seen school districts and other governing bodies get hit with various types of cyber attacks. This was, though, much larger than it appeared on the surface, and I think state government just realized how difficult it is if someone does something just as simple as clicking a link or downloading an attachment in an email, that these viruses can infiltrate the system, and they sit and they replicate and they span out, and by the time the hacker actually activates the ransomware, it's everywhere. It's in thousands of different computers, not only on the servers, but in the individual drives on these computers. And that's what the state found out. When they activated it, even though the state refused to pay the ransom, and they thought, well, we can just go in, wipe all these things clean, everything's backed up, it's not a problem. All the information and data is safe, and nothing was compromised. Putting it back onto these machines and getting these machines up and running has been an extremely difficult process.
So then what are we going to do to avoid this in the future? Several agencies were shut down for at least a day, and departments, and then OMV for days and days.
Right, and it really will be next week before every office is up and running, hopefully next week, and all services are available. All of the experts we've talked to said really the only thing that can be done is more education of the users to make sure people know that unless you know an email is from a trusted source, and you actually look at the address, not just the name that displays, because they can make a name appear that is in your contact list, but if you look at the actual address of the email, it won't be that person's address. Don't click an attachment. Don't click a link. Don't download anything in an email unless you absolutely know it's from a trusted source. And they said there's got to be more education. It's just not in government. Major corporations have been hit by this, businesses and individuals. The ransomware hackers, many of them in Russia, it's only about the money for them. And they will hit as many, they don't care how big or small you are. If they can get into your system, lock your files, and say, you can't have them back unless you pay us, they will hit anybody and everybody.
But they don't think this is somebody from Russia, do they?
They haven't been able to, they haven't announced the exact source of where it came from, nor who it was who clicked the link or downloaded the attachment. But it's someone who was just in it to get money. The state refused to pay the money, but now there are those who are saying, would it have been better? But you have no guarantee. If you pay the money to a hacker, they may restore your files, but how do you know they're not going to take them away again in the future and keep a foothold somewhere in your system?
For the most part, though, the computers are up and running. State government, OMV, has just been the one to sort of take it.
Well, they had the most computers. They had dozens and dozens of computers in every location, dozens of locations, and they just have to literally, someone has to sit down, wipe those computers clean, and reload all the information.
Go quick now. Looking ahead, real quick.
Keep December 28 in mind. That's the date of two bowl games, the Fiesta and the Peach Bowls, and the ones who win those two games will be the ones who come to New Orleans to play for the national championship game 2 weeks later, and we're suspecting one will be LSU.
We hope. Dave.
The Sanger Theater opens December 12th, and we'll be back up and running, and that's good news and more evidence that it looks like things are stabilized there.
Definitely good news. Sarah?
Well, on the political front, Mandeville is already talking about electing a new mayor. Donald Villery is term limited, and there's 4 candidates running.
All right. David?
Personally, I'm very excited to tell you that I'm going to be attending a investigative reporting conference in Kiev in 2 weeks.
Really?
I was invited before any of this stuff happened, before the phone call even happened.
Well,
so I'll tell you how it goes.
Great investigators going over there, and you're going to tell us what the real truth is until we know you are. And is it Kiev or Kiev? Kiev is what we hear. All right, guys. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.